Okay, so here's a quick tour of the approach behind rapid ID improvement. We can think of performance of people or teams as a combination of their motivation and their know-how to perform tasks and to solve problems. Rapid ID improvement is an approach to accelerate the growth of know-how in individuals and teams. So the question then is, how does know-how grow? How can things and performance improve based on improving know-how? The answer really is via a specific combination of creative and critical thinking. Let's look at the different possibilities. So if creative thinking is low and critical thinking is low, we will always be convinced that we are right since we are not critical, and also will never come up with new approaches to new problems since we have low creative thinking. Suppose our critical thinking goes up, but creative thinking is still low, then we're going to stick to existing ideas and existing solutions, but we're going to criticize them ever more. That's basically boiling down to being pessimistic and even cynical about progress and not making any progress at all. On the flip side, say that we are low in critical thinking but high in creative thinking, then we're going to come up with new solutions all the time, but not investigate or try to think of how they may fail to solve a problem. And hence, we'll also not be making progress and we'll resort to a kind of naive optimism. It's only when both creative thinking and critical thinking are high, and in this kind of alternating way where we are creatively guessing new approaches, new solutions to solve a problem, but we're alternating that with criticisms to eliminate, so to say, the bad parts of our solutions while preserving the good parts. And that fuels the growth of know-how and improves how we solve problems effectively. So how does this alternation between creative and critical thinking works in practice? Turns out there's a simple schema that you can follow to practice it and basically apply it to any problem you want to solve in business, whether it is a problem of increasing efficiency in some process or selling more effectively to some segment or even driving up the engagement in a team. It goes as follows. It starts with a problem, which is always a combination between a goal, which is the improvement you're after and you want to achieve, and a list of bottlenecks and constraints that prevent you from achieving the goal right away or automatically. Then there are solutions that attempt to solve the problem and hence fix the bottlenecks and constraints in such a way that the goal is being achieved. So a solution is always a set of actions and choices, but also an argument for how those actions and choices affect the bottlenecks and constraints in a way that the goal is being reached. So solutions are never just lists of actions somewhere out of the blue. They come with an argument for how they fix the bottleneck and constraints. And then the third phase is that you're challenging, and that's the critical thinking phase. You're challenging your solutions and you try to come up with undesired consequences of the actions and choices that make your solution fail to be a good solution to the problem. So you start by describing the goal, describing bottlenecks and constraints. Typically, you would want to seek the deeper bottlenecks and constraints, not the superficial symptomatic ones. Examples of constraints are in process efficiency, there will be the sources of wasteful activities in processes, of variability in quality, of inflexibility to changing demand. Bottlenecks and constraints in commercial processes are, for example, all the objections that a prospect is communicating for which he doesn't want to buy your product at this stage already. So you list all of them and then you get into the creative phase of coming up with solutions, like what can we do? Different actions and choices, including how they would affect the bottlenecks such that the goal is reached. But here you will typically come up with multiple variants creatively, because there are many ways, of course, to affect a bottleneck and a constraint. And so this is what we call the divergence phase. And then the convergence comes from challenging the solution. So trying to identify undesired consequences. And if you've done so, you're going to eliminate the solutions, because those are not good solutions to your problems. And then there will be typically at least one solution where you cannot find any undesired consequence for anymore. And that'll be the one that goes on to get implemented. You can run through this in another sequence as well, like line by line. You start with a solution, you're seeking undesired consequences. If you found an undesired consequence, you're going to eliminate the solution, and you'll be pressed to adapt it and creatively come up with a solution that doesn't have the undesired consequence of the previous one. And that can go on for some while until, again, you have adapted your solutions creatively such that you can't come up with any new undesired consequence, and the actual solution is adapted in such a way that it doesn't have all the prior undesired consequences that the eliminated solutions had. That's the point where your know-how has grown, where your solution has become a better solution, objectively better solution than any of your previous attempts. So really, this alternation back and forth between creative thinking and critical thinking is what is embodied here in the process. And the interesting question now is to identify how teams or companies make mistakes to this schema and to problem solving. And we can look at those again also in three buckets. So the mistakes on the side of the problem are typically that we wish for improvements, but we don't understand that there are constraints. We don't understand the constraints. We are a bit too superficially looking at constraints, or worse, we're denying even that there are constraints. That's one. Another one is that we're kind of trying to prove that a problem is not soluble because of the constraints, so that we're elevating the constraints to a degree that they're insurmountable barriers and that the problem isn't soluble anymore. Or we can overanalyze always constraints and lose time and focus by just, getting deeper and deeper into constraints without actually testing and trying to come up with solutions. The typical mistakes that are being made in the solution phase are that we too quickly select and defend already a solution. And we do that based on what we think is the goodness of the solution and how it scores in terms of goodness. And this scoring can be implicit, but is always based on typically the authority we have for coming up with solutions, the experience, the belief in it, specific positive aspects. But the reason that it is preventing better solution is that any other solution could score equally well, but still solve the problem better. And so it's a way of preventing the growth of know-how and the quality of your solutions. So that's also an important one to try to avoid when solving problems. And it's really when you can't come up with a decent challenge, so a relevant undesired consequence, that the problem is solved, and not before that, not because some of the solutions are feeling well, are in line with your experience and are therefore deemed to be good. That's all ways of stopping problem solving way too soon and selecting and defending a solution, whereas there could still be valid criticisms to those solutions and they could still be improved. The mistake we typically make in the last phase, the challenge phase, is that we tend to assume that we cannot be wrong. If we're avoiding challenges, if we are avoiding to seek for undesired consequences, that's typically a symptom of thinking that we are right already, that we cannot be wrong. And obviously that is preventing the growth of solutions and the growth of know-how in a very significant way if we're doing it like that. So those are three areas where we are typically making the mistakes against this problem-solving method. So this was a quick tour of the approach. We've implemented this in a software tool that is also being aided by artificial intelligence, both for the stimulation of the creative thinking as well as the stimulation of the critical thinking. If you're interested in finding out more about this approach, don't hesitate to visit us at rapididimprovement.com and book a free introduction and demo.